So good morning, everyone. People are still arriving, but maybe we can start and then people keep coming. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Monika Meireles, who is a professor and a researcher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She has her PhD made at the same university, in spite of being Brazilian. She's Brazilian. She studied here at the University of São Paulo for the undergraduate studies, but then she moved to Mexico and then she stayed there, right? Her PhD is in Latin American studies, right? So she's an economist. Her original background is in economics, but then she has this multidisciplinary approach, which is amazing. And she's also a great friend. So the floor is yours, Monika, please.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you very much, all the organizers, Carolina, Bruno, Célio, and all the support from Camila Ventura. I know that's a crazy week, but we are going to an end. So let's keep the energy up. This time in the morning, no? This is a kind of flight route that we are going to have today for my session. The first part, I'm going to present myself again, but highlighting my latest work. After that, I'm going to present a paper that was published this March, and the number 2 is a book presentation. I'm very kind to present this book because it's co-edited with Unicamp and UNAL, Universidad Nacional de Colombia, the National University of Colombia. And Bruno is one of the co-editors, so it's very special to make this quick presentation here. And then in the last part of our session, we are going to have our oriented discussion, no? Because I have a surprise mini paper here that we are going to read all together in the final part, and then we can start our discussion. So, oops, it's very sensitive. As Bruno said, I'm a Brazilian economist. I studied here at the Universidade de São Paulo, my undergrad and my master's, but in my master's I start to running away from economics per se and trying to achieve a more multidisciplinary approach on my work. So that's why I pursue this formation, this academic formation. So after my master's, I went to Mexico to this program, which is a multidisciplinary graduate course on Latin American studies. And we have here Hector. Where is Hector? And if you want more information about this program, it's Hector can tell you because he is a PhD student there. And well, this is more or less my academic trajectory. I'm in Mexico now for 15 years. I never thought that I'm going to be an immigrant, and look at me now, as visiting scholar in Brazil, being a Brazilian, but this is the kind of itineraries that the life prepared to us. No? So, commenting my last work, so my latest work, there is a paper, I write mainly in Portuguese and Spanish, but there are some work in English, so if you have interest in, you can find some of my production in English as well. This one was published in Mexico, but in a review that published in English, because they have this approach of working very closely with the American universities. And and this post-pandemic inflation, a structural reading, and what I worked there, what is inspired by a Mexican economist from the structuralist Latin American economic consult, Juan Loyola Vázquez, who was a very important economist at his time and at CEPAL, at the structuralist period of CEPAL or CLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin American countries, Juan Loyola Vázquez. So based on his work, I try to explain a little bit the nature and the origins, the structural origins of these high prices that we are experiencing after the pandemic. The second paper there is a collaboration with Jonathan Badilho, and was published here, and is again a theoretical effort to discuss Latin American economic thought, but at this paper we try to map the apports of structuralist economic thought on economic integration, but considering all the political aspects and difficulties to deepening the economic integration in Latin America. The third paper there is a chapter with Alanis Lisset, who is a Mexican economist, postdoc researcher at the Instituto of Investigaciones Económicas, where I'm based, and it is a reflection on the whole of pension funds and the financial benefits of the pension funds and Mexico during the pandemic. So it's an exercise of trying to understand how they win, because a lot of workers anticipated their retirement plans, so they are quitting from the private funds for retirement and anticipating the resource from the financial resource that they are keep it from them there. So this is the last one, and this is a chapter in the book that we coordinated with Bruno Diego Guevara, a Colombian economist who is now in the government with Petro, and published by Routledge this year. So this is this is the zero part. Now coming to the first part that of our talk. No, this is the presentation of a paper that, as I said before, published in March this year, and in collaboration with Daniel Aparicio, a PhD student there, and Gabriela Rivera, an undergrad student there, and myself. To keep track of time, I prefer to passing the PowerPoint, but I'm going to read the presentation, so I'm not going to lose myself in dispersing my thoughts in my line of argument. So to start, the title of this paper is Latin American Post-Pandemic, Debt, Financial Instability, and Uneven Economic Recovery. One of the collateral economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic has been regionalized borrowing at the individual level, as well as in families, households, financial corporations, non-financial corporations, and even a rapid increase in government debt. Also of a varied nature and with a completely different objectives or aims, the overall debt increase in each type of borrowing mentioned is still a worrisome phenomenon for the post-pandemic landscape. The combination of a larger amount of debt with a highly uncertain environment is an uncomfortable mix for future economic strengths. More specifically, the implications of increased borrowing are especially alarming when looked at in the Latin American context. It is relevant to mention that Latin America is home to 8.5% of the world's population and 28.3% of all deaths from coronavirus. Therefore, as one of the regions most affected by the recurring negative economic effects of the pandemic, we must worry about signs of uneven economic recovery among its member countries, in addition to the growing debt. For example, Chile, the country with the most successful vaccination campaign, has been able to temporarily put aside part of the political and social tensions that arose with the election victory of Gabriel Boric in November 2021. President of the I Support Dignity Coalition, Apruebo Dignidad Coalition, making Chilean economy reactivation look as tough as it will arrive much faster. At the same time, Brazil prospects continues to be worrisome, as the management of the health crisis by the proto-fascist Bolsonaro regime has not only been catastrophic, but has unduly compromised the outlook for the recovery of economic activity and has jeopardized the country's development trajectory. We have to mention that this paper was written at the end of 2001, and we were making our corrections in 2002. So 2022. That's right. Thank you. In light of the above, the focus of this paper is a discussion of the effects of the pandemic on public and private borrowing in Latin America. Considering that the government debt incurred to finance an expansion of public expansion as a result of the health emergency is of a different nature than business and family debt. It is argued here that both can be observed to have increased substantially and that this trend clearly increases financial vulnerability on the road to regional economic recovery. It is recognized that indebtedness in Latin America has been on an upward trend since 2013, but this has accentuated in 2020 as a result of the emergency programs that were promoted in the region when external debt reached the value of 48.2% of the GDP, the highest ratio in the last decade, and nearly 10% above 2009. In 2021, external indebtedness as a proportion of the region's GDP decreased by 5% from 2020 levels, but Brazil, Chile, and Colombia saw an increase in external financial flows, which suggests the continuation of a Ponzi type of financial scheme. This further compromised future research to foreign entities, and considering the current interest rate increases in the United States, it will make the probability of a moratorium on interest payments even more severe, sacrificing the possibilities of stable and sustained growth. As such, the primary goal of this paper is to reflect on what these obvious expansions in borrowing by economic actors truly means and what the implications are for the real economy. More specifically, it seeks to develop a critical mapping of the implications of large-scale borrowing for financial instability in the post-pandemic context. Supported by the interpretation of descriptive statistics, this analysis is anchored in heterodox economic theory and particularly inspired by the post-Keynesian literature on the discussion of development by Latin American structuralist authors. For the purpose of organizing the arguments within, this paper is divided into 4 sessions. Into 4 sessions. The first and the most theoretical one is the discourse regarding the notion of financial instability in the work of Minsk, extrapolated to the case of sovereign debt as postulated in Jan Kregel work of 2004-2006, with the intention of better understanding the implications of growing indebtedness in the post-pandemic period. Section 2 refers to the process of incurring private debt behavior under same circumstances. Following analysis of the paper concludes with a series of reflections on the importance of the borrowing process and uneven economic recovery in the past and in the present. So this is the first part of the paper. Inspired by Keynes' interpretation of capitalism as a monetary mode of production, Hyman Minsky made a name for himself in economics. Also, his works covered various research topics. He shines in his hypothesis on financial instability as a cyclical condition of capitalism. According to Minsky, I'm quoting here, the financial instability hypothesis is a theory of the impact of debt on system behavior and also incorporates the manner in which debt is validated. Consequently, financial fragility occurs when the foundations of the economic engine, productive investment, start to wear down. For a better understanding of this idea, the elements that, when combined, reveal Minsky's conception of financial fragility must be revealed. First, Minsky starts with the fact that investment itself is the motor behind economic performance. When investment spending grows considerably as a result of profits, confidence in future profits also grows, which in turn boosts investment levels. These combinations of high confidence and a virtuous cycle bolsters the financial leverage of both non-financial corporations and investors, while at the same time reducing the preference for cold hard cash. This means that the liquidity preference is systemically disincentivized in favor of high-risk investments. Consequently, the pool of retained earnings is used for reinvestment less and less frequently. At the same time, debt transactions increase, facilitate shares issued by the company. Faced with these great expectations and possibilities of future profitability, not only does the preference for liquidity decrease, but debt levels and interest rates increase. The tendency toward greater leverage from non-financial corporations generated during the waxing of the economic cycle causes both transactional and non-transactional influxes of money to become increasingly chained to the repayment calendar for previously contracted debt. Thus, corporate cash flow is increasingly tied to previous assumed financial commitments, leaving fewer resources available to expanding productive capacity, and any indication of future economic deceleration translate into potential financial instability in the present. One of the most noteworthy characteristics of a Minsky work on financial instability hypothesis is the explanation based on the identification of three financing patterns of non-financial corporations. I don't know if you are all familiar with the Minsky works and the patterns, so I'm going to jump ahead. Okay? So considering the three patterns of financing investment that Minsky consolidated, these concepts reveal an increasing trend on financial substantial part of the non-financial corporations under the Ponzi model, given the drive for fast results combined with extreme credit availability. At both a macro and sectorial level, the result of the transition from a more secure to a less secure financial pattern is the formation of the foundations for a generalized financial fragility effect on the economy. When the majority of non-financial corporations are financed with a Ponzi scheme, the propensity for default becomes more acute, and given the house of cards effect set off when a company fails to comply with its debt repayment calendar, it's more likely that the economy will experience frequent episodes of financial crisis, with an immediate depressive effect on the real economy as a whole. Also, it may have been Hyman Minsky who began systematically analyze the different finance patterns for productive activity, highlighting the tendency to move towards a higher occurrence of Ponzi-type finance during an economic expansion. His findings did not analyze public debt. Nevertheless, the extrapolation of the original thesis enunciated by Minsky on financial fragility to a national economy is fully possible, as Kregel said, that this type of approach highlights that the financial risk inherent in public indebtedness patterns is especially worsened when there is a mutation from a speculative to a Ponzi-type finance scheme by countries, and especially the case in Latin American countries. In addition, we find that the countries in the region with an upward trend in their fiscal and trade deficits derived from their dependency on imports, mainly capital goods, which have placed them to the problematic situation of financing such deficits with internal and external indebtedness. According to Kregel, the transition from a speculative financing scheme to a Ponzi-type scheme in Latin America is a recurrent problem, which resurfaced precisely with the implementations of the famous Brady Plan and the external debt restructuring in the 80s and 90s, which ended up promoting a secondary market of standardized public and private debt securities and deepening new source of financial fragility. To sum up, a careful concatenation of the theoretical contributions of Minsky and Kregel enables the creation of a more appropriate underlying theory for the argument built in this paper. Thus, in the context of the pandemic, the alarming level of debt and the critical fragility which have historically functioned as a base element of the explanation of financial crisis in Latin America are not only present but intensified. Nossa, me picou um novadoso. And this is the second part of the paper. We make a discussion here about the expansion of public debt, if it was necessary or if it was irresponsible. And of course, we think it was necessary, but we have to keep the track of where is going this debt acquired before, no? So this was one of the recommendations of the CLAC, no? All the governments in Latin America should, and great part of them really impose the counter-cyclical measures, but have to keep track of the spending, no? So let's see if this part keep track of the spending was accepted or not by the governments. Going back to my text. The pandemic threw a pre-existing problem of unequal income distribution in Latin America into stark relief. Around 60% of the economically active population in the region works in the informal sector, and in 2020, this sector experienced the greatest job losses. Additionally, the inequality became more explicit when, faced with stricter confinement measures, a large part of the population engaged in informal work had to leave their houses daily, exposing themselves to the virus to avoid losing their source of income. Thus, it can be inferred that private borrowing increased in order to complement the family budget in the case of households and to rectify immediate liquidity problems in the case of firms. Regarding the expansion of public borrowing, Latin American governments are in disagreement regarding whether an increase in debt is necessary or is necessary to reverse the current socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic, or a new reverse of the current or a new chapter in the history of the fiscal responsibility in the region is in course. Contrary to the conventional thought regarding the South and healthy public finance, promoting public borrowing in order to expand the fiscal space has been the rallying cry of modern money theory, MMT, recently defended by Ray and company, and others inspired by the notion of functional finance of Abba Lerner. According to MMT, local currency debt in a country that issues its own currency should not create significant problems for two basic reasons. A, the definition, these governments cannot default as they have the capacity to print this currency and liquidate both holdings, and B, in the medium and long term, the danger of inflation can be kept at the bay by the greater productive capacity brought about by this expansion fiscal policy. Of course, considering that the international monetary system is extremely asymmetric space and that there is a hierarchy of currency acceptability, it will be problematic to apply the teachings of modern money theory on public finance management ipsis literis to peripheral countries, whose currencies is at the base of the monetary pyramid. Thus, contrary to Ray's assertions, for the group of Latin American heterodox economists specializing in the money hierarchy notion, the benefits of monetary sovereignty for developing countries do not imply the same prerogatives that central countries with sovereign currency enjoy. This section has argued that the topic of public borrowing is complex and should be seen as a myline per se. Public debt can be used as an additional instrument to incentivize state and private sector capacities when channeled into financial capital expenditure, thus creating a virtuous cycle for the economy as a whole. This is why analyzing the origin of financing is also important, because it will depend on terms, amounts that entities that will replenish the resource. Again, in Latin American countries, increased domestic debt to expand productive capacity can be somewhat problematic, considering the asymmetric characteristics of the international monetary financial system. This is because, given the free movement of international capital, the conditions to create a highly vulnerable situation can manifest rapidly, and any kind of bad news could scare bond and domestic debt holders, causing a large-scale outflow of resources and consequently a balance of payment crisis. In terms of public borrowing, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were different rates of increase, credit granting conditions, and repayment calendars among Latin American countries. In most parts of the region, government executed programs consisting of cash transfers, subsidies, credit, and fiscal stimulus packages to some extent. According to the CLAC, around 2/3 of the public measures announced to support the business sector in Latin America were to facilitate liquidity and credit access. 20% was through direct aid, 10% in employment support, 6% in production support, and 1% in export support. In addition, the total magnitude of public expenditure in fiscal incentives made by Latin American government was 8.5% of 2020 GDP, financed largely through fiscal deficits and borrowing. This put 2020 public debt at 78.1% of GDP. When observing the relationship between loans made available by the government for financing other sectors of the economy, net loans, in comparison with public debt, net public loans, in Latin America, it is clear that 2020 witnessed a significant increase with a typical growth as a result of the pandemic. and that in 2021, this indicator decreased while still staying above its historical trend. The Brazilian government had a loan-to-borrow ratio of 10.2% of the GDP in 2015, a proportion that shrank by almost half in 2019 to 6%. Then, in 2020, it almost tripled with respect of the prior year, exceeding 16% of the GDP. In Mexico, the loan-borrow ratio decreased from 3.9% to 3.4% from 2015 to 2021, only exceeding its average in 2020 with a ratio of 6.8%. Chile and Colombia raised this ratio considerably in 2015 and 2021 period. Chile went from having a 2% balance with respect of the national GDP to 4% at the end of the period, with disparate growth in 2020, exceeding 8%. Colombia experiencing an analogous tendency, starting the period with a 3.5%, but closing in 2021 with a ratio of 6.1%. Additionally, I'm sorry. Yeah. Additionally, looking at the individual evolution of credit granted to Latin American government, there is a clear upward pattern recent years with particular acceleration in 2020. For instance, in 2015, credits to Brazilian government represent 27.1% of GDP, while the same indicator rose to 57.6% in 2020. Looking back upon the whole of public debt in the pandemic, the figure shows that GDP was positively related to spending financed by public debt. That is, in 2020, where additional spending to address the pandemic represented a larger part of the GDP in Brazil, in Chile, Colombia, and less in Argentina and Mexico. In short, the preoccupation with the financial health of Latin American government in a contest increase in public borrowing, combined with a climate of uncertainty that surrounds the post-pandemic recovery situation, is quite comprehensible. However, financing a counter-cyclical fiscal policy in the economic crisis unleashed by the COVID-19 emergence was necessary. We focus on the understanding the burden of the new public debt in the foreign currency and we focus on understanding the burden of the new public debt in foreign currency and or controlled by non-residents. The current tendency at the Federal Reserve to rise interest rates to mitigate growing inflation there is slowly leaving behind the quantitative easing policy previously enforced could result in a massive outflow of foreign capital from the region, the immediate result of which would be extra pressure of the exchange rate, driving up a debt payment in dollars and putting down the foundations for a new round of difficulties in handling the balance of payment. And now we are going to the private debt. Let me just... Immersed in an atmosphere of slow accumulation of capital, the 2020 economic restriction reinforced the overall drop in the private debt GDP ratio because the GDP was falling apart. However, the debt overrank of non-financial corporations has not shown any signs of being used to start a virtual cycle for post-pandemic recovery anchored in the enlargement of productive capacity, generation of employment, or the improvements for the society as a whole. In fact, it would seem that the largest scale increase in private debt reinforced a cycle of financial leverage, accompanied by credits granted to zombie corporation with a highly limited capacity for solvency and liquidity. If that were not enough, households have also joined the debt contracting frenzy, transferring part of their diminished income to the financial sector. Thus, given their structural vulnerabilities, households were not exempt from accelerating their debt during the health crisis, as can be observed in the figure 3. For the period analyzed, the only reduction in the household debt GDP coefficient was in Argentina, decreasing from 6.5% in 2015 to 4.9% in 2021, which better speaks to the immense distrust towards banks on behalf of the local population than the availability of extra financial resources at time of the crisis. Of the group of countries analyzed, Brazil and Colombia have shown the most considerable change in this indicator, with 28% and 26% increases respectively, which would cause important tensions within their banking sectors. Chile and Mexico also share the upwardly progressive household borrowing trend, increasing from 41% to 47% and 15% to 70% respectively between 2015 and 2021. Focusing on the increase in non-financial corporate debt illustrated in figure 4, there is an observable positive pattern for Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. For example, in the case of Chile, credit granted to firms outgrew the 2015 figures in 2015 was 106% of GDP to become 116% of the GDP in 2020. In Mexico, the same indicator grew by more than 11% between 2015 and 2021, propelled by the domestic financing provided by commercial banks, which are responsible for more than 40% of credits in Mexico. Likewise, in Argentina, credits to non-financial corporations increased from 14.9% to 22% between 2015 and 2021. This means that Argentina experienced a 48% change, mainly due to investment in small and medium business insurance company finance. Despite government support, pandemic borrowing from the private sector showed record levels in 2020 for the countries analyzed. The 12% expansion in Brazil and the 10% expansion in Colombia deserve special mention. In all cases, non-financial corporate debt is even more worrying than the increase in household debt. According to ECLAC, approximately 7.7 million businesses had closed at the end of 2020, representing 19% of total business in the region. So this is really alarming. No? Almost 20% of all business units in Latin America were closed by the pandemic crisis. These closures had the effect of an 8.81% in drop in employment in the sector where micro business, which create the most jobs, are mostly in the commerce sector and have low productivity, were the most affected. Since there is no economic policy focused on the reactivation of chains of production in Latin American countries, only projects with short-term profitability Only projects with short-term profitability will be stimulated, increasing bankruptcies and drawing out an economic recovery process. To continue in the theoretical vein of Minsky, when faced with uncertainty about the post-pandemic recovery scenario and the unreliable future of firms' transactional income, there is no doubt that an increase in borrowing means worsening financial fragility in the economies of the region. Now, final thoughts, and we are done in this part. An enormous increase in debt can be counted among the collateral economic effects of the pandemic in Latin America. Borrowing reached record levels in 2020, allowing us to return to Minsky financial fragility hypothesis and test it again under current conditions. Thus, it would not be an exaggeration to state that the increase in private debt would continuously wear away at our regional financial stability. The imminent risks includes an increase in overdue portfolios, B, stagnant debt overhang, and C, widespread bankruptcy accompanied by unemployment. Maybe this is a little bit exaggerated. These are positioning within an extremely complex post-pandemic environment with high levels of uncertainty about the future and a slow, flowing, satisfactory recovery in peripheral economies. However, when analyzing the behavior of public debt for financial extraordinary spending to counteract the negative socioeconomic effects of the pandemic, we find not only did it limit economic deceleration, but also facilitate conditions to improve economic recovery into 2021. This allowed Chile and Brazil to experience positive cumulative growth, while Argentina and Mexico have not managed to recover from the GDP shrinkage in 2020. Finally, despite the initiatives implemented, the socioeconomic regression has been widespread, as 22 million new people slipped below the poverty line regionally in 2020, and the regional wage gap widened. According to Eclat, in 2020, the Gini coefficient increased by almost 3% relative to the prior year, a smaller amount that would have been without the financial support that was implemented through that year. This shows that in the short term, government expenditure has fundamental for softening the blow of an even greater catastrophe. However, this does not mean that the level of public debt should be put under scrutiny in the future. Citizens must understand in detail how the extraordinary resources from the counter-cyclical measures to counteract the COVID-19 crisis were spent. Transparency in use, constant evaluation in the impact of public spending, and effective responsibility from the policymakers are the best guarantee that current public debt does not become a burden for future generations. Thank you. This is a sum up of the paper. And then I don't know if you wanna, because I have prepared the surprise last part with the text from Unicamp before I started to the discussion. So let's hold this, all the information until now. Now we are going to our book, and then come back to discussion, the specific discussion on the public and private indebtedness during the pandemic. But we are keeping with the pandemic, so with the effects from the pandemic, but in another work. This is the book that this is the book. And I'm very emotional about this because my physical copies of the book arrived at Mexico, so it's the first time that I'm seeing it. It's really nice work. So I'm going to ask if Bruno could help me a little bit, because the story behind this book was we started with a series of round tables with Diego, Guevara, Bruno, and myself, and some of researchers invited by us in virtual mode during the pandemic. And we we feel this necessity to keep track of what was going on in our countries. So we more or less, some of my Mexican friends said that this is a Ponzi book, because, or pyramidal scheme book, because each of us co-opted Mexicans, Brazilians, and Colombian economists to understand each of our countries during the economic effects of the pandemic in each of our countries. So that was more or less the beginning of the process. The first step was the roundtables and the discussions. Then we set a series of two seminars, one open seminar and one closed seminar with the authors. And then the original version of this book, which is in Spanish and it's for free, very different this Routledge version that in pounds, you have to buy it in pounds. For those who can read in Spanish, I will pass the link for the original publication that is hosted in the Unicamp homepage, and it's for free, and the whole book is there for free. Bruno, I don't know if you wanna.
Go ahead.
No, please.
You're great.
Yeah, I can drink the water.
Okay. Well, maybe just one additional thing is that unlike many other books which are organized in which the authors do not know each other and do not know the other works, as Monika said, we try to do it collectively in the sense that everybody had to read the other's papers and comment on it. So I guess this is one of the assets of the book. And then obviously, as the title says, the idea was discussing finance in Latin America during COVID-19, and obviously it was written during the COVID period. But it has some theoretical discussions, trying to get inspiration from its life, but then trying to use it for the current situation with the financialization, and then it has some applied studies as well. Not only on Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, but also Argentina.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So it's divided into three parts, as you can see. The first parts are more theoretical reflections, but then we go into financialization and financial reconfiguration in the pandemic, and then economic policies and their responses to the COVID-19. The chapter written by Monika was on pension funds in Mexico, very interesting analysis. So I won't go into every chapter, but then you can read it. This book will be available in our library as well. And as Monika said, unfortunately, the English version we do not have, even ourselves we do not have it yet, right? But the Spanish one is totally available.
In this a snapshot of each chapter. The first chapter, as Bruno mentioned, all the chapters grouped in the first part of the book have this more theoretical nature, but this doesn't mean that the other chapters don't have theoretical reflections. No, but this is the main focus of the chapters in this part of the book. So we have the first chapter, Dependency, Finance and Development, Echoes of the Past that Resonate in the Present, from Manuel Felipe Martinez and José Daniel Saad Filho. And this is a very interesting chapter because it tries to, and I think that achieve this ambition of propose a vocabulary, a very global South and Latin American vocabulary to think about finance today and financing in the context of the pandemic, using the center-periphery notions and trying to actualize and contemporize these notions, considering the financial domination of the capitalism nowadays. No, so this is a very interesting first chapter, and I think that these chapters give to us new concepts to think the core periphery relationship in times of financialization or predominance of finance, no? And how the asymmetries from the past are transformed nowadays. The second chapter is, we have the author here, so Bruno.
Yeah, it's based in the PhD thesis by Edipo de Almeida Oliveira, who was supervised by myself. And then the idea is applying the concept of international division of labor for the financial dimension. So what we propose is that there is an international division of finance. Actually, this was proposed by another PhD student who did his PhD with Daniela Prates some time ago in Berkeley, Lima. But then we get this concept and we try to use it precisely to understand the global finance within a structuralist approach, and then trying to understand that, well, the division of finance, in this division of finance, the periphery has a dependency but also a functionality for the central countries. And then at the end, there is this transfer of wealth, permanent transfer of wealth from the periphery to the center, not only through the International Division of Labor, but also through the International Division of Finance. So broad term, that's it.
And this is the chapter by Diego Guevara and Emilia Ormaechea, who is she is an Argentinian and is in Germany right now, studying her PhD from not. Yes, she's in Germany. And
Diego is the Vice Minister of Finance in Colombia.
Yes. We were very surprised by that, and then very glad for the news. And the new post of Diego is a great joy for us, but for academic proposals is kind of freeze our process of keeping studying with this group of authors, and I think that we have to think another ways to keep the people working at an academic level this thing. So Diego and Emilia, once again, I think that in all the chapters of the book, this concern in the heterodox approach that kind of a selective fusion between post-Keynesian or critical political economy, Marxist critical political economy with a structuralist perspective to discuss the economic effects of the pandemic and the restructuration of finances in the region in the pandemic context is always present in all chapters. But in these first 3 chapters is the main core of the argumentation. In this chapter is Latin America between regressive structural change and the pandemic. And once again, they are fusion the literature on financialization and subordinate financialization with unsolved nature of socio-economic problems associated with the periphery productive structure of the regions. No? So this is one of the chapters that is where this mix of heterodox influences of critical finance and Latin American structuralist reading can bring together to build or try to build a new framework for studies. And then the chapter 4, Armando Negrete is a young researcher at the Economic Research Institute where I'm based on, and he was very glad to be part of this project. He studied mainly Marxist theory of dependency. He's a Marinist, Rui Mauro Marini, who was a Brazilian sociologist who made a great part of his academic career in Mexico, and Armando is is completely in love with marine works, and he tried again using the background of the Marxist, the Latin American Marxist dependence theory to understand the financiation process in Latin America, no? And how crisis detonates structural problems and exposes the contradictions already present in the global economic structure. But this is mainly his contribution in his chapter. And then we have, I don't know, Bruno, if you can help me here.
Okay. Marcos Vinicius Quiliato is a former student here, but now he works for a long time already at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington. And then Daniela Pratos is a former professor, my supervisor, by the way, and she's now at Unicamp. And then they wrote this very interesting chapter on the development banks, trying to show the differences between the action of those development banks in the global financial crisis back in 2009-10, and now with the COVID crisis. But also they do some theoretical discussions on development banks, and they show all development banks acting in Latin America. So it's really a very interesting chapter from people who came from academy, but who are now staff of these multilateral organizations. So it's really interesting.
The chapter 6 is from Rivera and myself, and as I mentioned before, we met how the Afores, which is the private funding for retirement in Mexico, all the retirement system in Mexico is privatized, and they have this possibility of anticipated and to get the money before the retirement, and this is what happened in Mexico. A lot of workers who have their savings in this kind of retirement plans anticipated, and with a penalty to get the money right now. So this is more or less what we analyze here, but there is also a reflection on the problems with private social assistance and retirement plans in Mexico. That is more or less what we analyze in the chapter. And then the chapter 7 is from Leonardo Rojas Rodriguez and Santiago Castaño. Santiago also is in the government with Diego, in the Colombian government there. And here the argument is how with heterodox lens we have to think about a more tuned coordination between monetary and fiscal policies, and this argument is built analyzing the lack of coordination among economic policy instruments during the COVID crisis. No? And chapter 8 is from Teresa Gonzalez and Eufemio Basilio, two Mexican economists. The two of them are very interested in Brazil. And they analyze, and this always this comparison of what kind of set of economic or public policy each country could bring to the table for trying to confront the negative economic effects of the pandemic. So this is I thought it was my line. It's a closer comparative analysis between Brazil and Mexico in terms of the response of public policy through the pandemic. And then The final chapter, chapter 9, is from, Bruno Ezequiel is a student here, was a student here.
Yes, he studies the effects of the pandemic on Argentina, actually within a framework which sees the effects of international liquidity cycles on Argentinian external vulnerability over time, but then intensify it obviously during the pandemic through this approach of the currency hierarchy and monetary sovereignty.
And then, that's it.